I've been making sample libraries for instruments that do not exist. Howdy folks, I'm Hunter Rogerson, and I'm releasing a series of sample libraries called Imaginary Instruments through my very own sample library company, Hearth and Hollow Audio. I felt like this series of sample libraries deserved its own video because the concept is so interesting. There's a ton packed into it. So I want to take a second to talk about the ethos and the philosophy, kind of what motivates the project, but also just kind of transparently lay out what makes it tick. Like, how do I make an imaginary instrument? These libraries don't use any synthesized sound, there's no physical modeling, and there's no generative AI used at any step in the process. I am actually recording physical instruments, which might seem counterintuitive, but stick with me. Let's break down the process for sampling an instrument. Let's say the task in front of you is to sample a piano. You've got to get a big batch of recordings that, when assembled together in some sampling software, recreates the experience of playing or hearing a piano. So you definitely want to get the notes, but you should probably get the note releases. You might want to consider mechanical noises like the hammers or the pedal being pressed and released. You kind of get the idea that each instrument is made up of ingredients. There are a certain number of them that are required in the sampling process to bring an instrument to life. If you do this enough, you start to kind of notice those ingredients in every instrument you see. Now, I can take this exact thought process and apply it to an instrument that I've imagined, or whose sound I've discovered by experimenting with an instrument. There's a very long tradition of experimenting with instruments in unintuitive ways to get really interesting sounds. Think of prepared pianos, or an ebow, which is a little electromagnetic device that you can hold over a guitar string that lets it sustain forever. This sound, while somewhat similar to the sound of a guitar, kind of takes on a sound of its own. Now, the rub with all of these different techniques, and something you maybe have discovered if you've grabbed a cello bow and dragged it across an acoustic guitar, is that it's fun for a little bit, and then it kind of turns into a gimmick. And that's partly because you lose playability. Take that acoustic guitar example again. The strings are all flat, so the bow hits all of them all at once, and you realize, well, the thing isn't built to be played this way. So in the real world, while playing an instrument, these are just physically impractical. But in the world of sampling, this is a wide open door. So I want to take the idea of a prepared piano or an ebow to its functional extreme. I want to hear a sound that no longer represents the original instrument at all. And as long as I can get all the ingredients I need to put that instrument back together in a sampler, then I can create an instrument that can only exist as a sample library, but one that had to be played physically in a real space by a real person, just like any other instrument that has been sampled. Now, this is a pretty interesting distinction to me between the idea of the imaginary instruments and taking recordings and manipulating them with effects or granular synthesis or something, which, by the way, I love doing. But it's just a different thing. It's more like an augmentation or a mangling of a sound. This is alchemy. Even as the person that played these samples on the original instrument, I find myself fully buying into this new imaginary instrument and forgetting the original source completely. Because here's where I think these projects have kind of given me a fresh look on sampling. Instruments really just are vessels for vibrations, but our brains also really love categorization and pattern seeking. So as soon as you can recognize something as familiar, you often trade away a lot of the potential for that thing in return for very reliable boundaries. By making these instruments, I've noticed that if I turn myself away from those categories like piano or cello or guitar, then I stop hearing what I think they ought to be, and I start hearing them for what they actually are. In what world could it be useful to refer to those two sounds as being the same instrument? So if I give it a new name, I give it a new shape, that door opens just a little bit wider. For each release in the Imaginary Instrument series, I'll be doing a regular walkthrough, all the normal walkthrough things, demonstrations, talking about the features of the library. But I'll talk about the instrument as if it's just a real, normal instrument. And then sometime after, I'll release a video that's a behind the scenes of how I made the thing and what the original instrument was. But that's kind of a double-edged sword to me, because on the one hand, I really love sharing this idea that we can get so much mileage out of things that are already at our fingertips. That's really inspiring to me, but I also don't want to suck the magic out of the experience for anybody. So I guess I'll just leave it up to you whether or not you'd like to take a peek behind the curtain. In truth, it's a bit of a win-win either way. Folks, I am genuinely so excited to get these imaginary instruments out into the world. They're obviously inspiring from the development side of things, but they've also very specifically been inspiring from the composer's point of view. They've given me that rare feeling of discovery that I had, the first time you write with a string library, or the first time you write with a solo cello library that has true legato. These were exciting moments where I get to write music using a tool I've never used before, and these scratch that itch. These are genuinely new instruments that I've never written with. And I hope that some of that inspiration finds its way to you guys. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.